Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In this talk, we will be concerned about the Shroud of Turin. And as we know, the Shroud of Turin is one of the most studied objects in the world and one of the most mysterious and more controversial. The big question about the Shroud of Turin is if the shroud is authentic, and if it is, or if it is not, how has the image been generated? So we will tackle this mystery by describing the shroud and describing its properties, and then trying to understand about the claims that are done about this object. Of course, the shroud is supposed to be a cloth that had been laid under the body and then over the body, so that we have a very long, can you hear me? A very long cloth with two images, the front image and the back image of the man of the shroud. The shroud is a very old linen cloth, about 4.5 meters long and 1.10 meters wide. It has a very faint image of, okay, maybe this way. A very faint image of the front image of a man and the back image. These are the burn holes because in 1532 the shroud was damaged by a fire when it was stored in Chambéry, France. Now the line of thought is, if the shroud is authentic, it can have been produced, the image can have been produced as a miracle, and then it's useless to discuss about this, or the image is the product of a natural process. If the shroud is not authentic, how has the image been generated? Because they claim that this is an impossible image that cannot be explained, cannot be reproduced. So, let's see if there are evidences that the shroud is not authentic. This is my line of thought. If, for example, we compare the Shroud of Turin with the real Palestinian first-century shrouds that have been found by archaeologists, we can see that the Shroud of Turin is completely different, because real shrouds are different, have a different weave, not herringbone like that of a Turin shroud. It's a plain weave, where in more pieces, one close for the face and one longer for the body, was wrapped and tied, and these are places where real shrouds or residues of them had been found. So the Shroud of Turin is a fake according to the archaeology, and also is not consistent with the Gospels, because the Gospels talks about two different pieces of cloth and there is no image on them. Secondly, the Shroud of Turin is not known since the 1st century, but it appeared in France around 1355 or so. And as soon as it appeared, there was a very sharp controversy between the local bishop, who declared it to be a fake, and the church where the shroud has been displayed, getting money from pilgrims and so on. And there is a number of documents and records, and in particular, it's a letter written to Bishop Pierre d'Arcy, to the Pope Clemens VII in Avignon, where the bishop says that the shroud is a fake, and the artist that had manufactured it had been found, and the shroud had been painted in a very clever way. Unfortunately, we don't know the name of this artist and what this clever way was supposed to be. But however, so the shroud is a fake for history and also for the church, because for several centuries since it appeared in France, the church itself declared it to be a fake, a reproduction, not the real burial cloth of Jesus. Another reason why we can think that the shroud is not authentic is that, let's see what happens if we have a real body and we paint it completely with red paint, and then we put a sheet flat on this body. Here we have a wig with long hairs. Can you see it? Yes. This is the result. And this is what happens, or this, depending on how you lay the cloth or the sheet on the body. This is the original that I have here. So basically, as you can see, this is a very ugly image. It's a mess. The image is not shaded, has no the half tones of the Shroud of Turin, and it's completely distorted. You see the face, how large it is, you see the legs and so on, because there is a wraparound distortion that it's unavoidable. So this tells us that whatever the Shroud of Turin is, it's not the print of a real body on a cloth. In other words, the shroud is a fake. Well, this is my face, for example, is a fake also according to geometry. Then the shroud has been examined by a committee in 1976, and they had analyzed the blood stains looking for blood. Blood was not found, and the director of the Turin Museum said that the cloth itself is not maybe that old. There are no examples of that kind of cloth of the first century, so the shroud is a fake for the first independent experts. And then the shroud is a fake according to forensic science and according to common sense. For example, the blood here flows on the outside of the hair, whereas it should flow on the scalp and mass and be smeared on the front, on the body. It cannot flow outside like that. Also, the hair shouldn't be visible in a laying body. Shouldn't leave that print. And the arms are not the same length. This hand, well, you cannot see it. It's deformed and has longer fingers and so on and so on. So the last reason is that in 1988 the shroud was carbon dated, and carbon dating said that it was manufactured in around 1300. So when it appeared in France, that the carbon age corresponds to the historical age. So the shroud is also fake for the last independent experts. If the shroud is a fake, how was it done? Well, we have to understand the properties of the image. In 1898, they took the first picture of the shroud, and it was evident that the negative of the shroud is very realistic, lifelike. This was considered almost as a miracle. How is it possible? Hundreds of years before the discovery of photography, that the shroud has this property. Okay, And this also is a positive of the shroud, and this is a negative where the image is much more visible. Okay, 10 years later, no, not 10, in 1978, they analyzed the negative of the shroud with a computer program that can transform the light parts of the negative and the dark parts of the negative into a virtual surface like this, and they discovered that the image contains some 3D informations. This is the face, for example, and this cannot be obtained by a normal photonegative, because a photonegative is encoded according to the direction of the light, where there is an information that corresponds to the distance between the face or the body and the cloth on it. So something very strange. In 1978, the shroud has been examined for 3 days by a team of American scientists in Turin after a display. So for the first time, the backing cloth has been removed and photographed and X-rayed. They took pictures, microphotographs, and small samples of the surface fibers and so on. They discovered more or less what the image consists of. And it consists, there is no pigment, it's not a paint, not a painting, it consists of yellow fibers on the top of the threads. This is a thread, and these are the yellow fibers, many small discolored spots that make up the image. Well, the blood stains are quite different. There is a pigment, there is something insoluble in them, and the threads are glued together, and they soak the cloth and go to the other side. The image is not fluorescent under UV radiation. It means it doesn't give out light if you use a UV lamp. However, famous microscopist Walter Macron found microtraces of ochre only on the image fibers. But the other scientists of Sturb didn't believe him, and he was pushed out of the Sturb. However, the ochre traces are there because the ochre was found again later when the shroud has been vacuum cleaned. This is a sort of vacuum cleaner. This guy is aspirating the dust between the shroud and the backing cloth. And what he found was a lot of iron oxides, namely ochre in various hydration forms. And again, 10 years after the Sturp examination, as I said, the shroud has been carbon dated. In 2002, the shroud has been restored, the backing cloth has been unstitched, and now the shroud is stored in a high technology box under nitrogen, and so on and so on. So, to summarize the properties of the shroud, it's a faint image, it has half tones, it's a pseudo-negative, it's superficial because it's on one side of the cloth, and it contains this three-dimensional information. The image consists of discolored fibers, and according to the Sturp scientist, this discoloration can have a thermal or a chemical origin. Pigment, well, the image is not a pigment, but there are microtraces of ochre where the image is, and the image is not fluorescent. So, how was the shroud made if it is a fake? First of all, any contact mechanism cannot yield a shaded image. This is not a shaded image. However, blood stains and scourge marks are sharp, and this would imply a contact mechanism. The two things don't fit together. And the dorsal, the back image, has the same intensity as the frontal one. This is also strange because we think that the back image should have been generated by the weight of a whole body, and the front image only by a sheet laying on the body. So also this is strange. So what? Well, a first attempt to explain how the image has been generated was done by an Italian university professor, Vittorio Pesce Delfino. He thought that, well, Sturp experts said that this image could have a thermal origin, so he used a metal bas-relief. He heated the bas-relief in an oven. He put a linen cloth on it, and what he got was like a scorch of the linen, like this. So this is an image that is not distorted because he used the bas-relief, which is a distorted face, and the image is not distorted, is faint, is shaded, is superficial, and on the back of the cloth there is no image, and is a pseudo-negative. On the right you see the negative of the image. So it has many of the properties of the Shroud of Turin. And it has no pigment, of course, because it is scorching. This is a clever method, but it has a few weak points. For example, it would require life-size metal bas-relief. You should heat it exactly the right temperature and put the linen cloth on it exactly for the required time, a few seconds more, and you will burn the cloth, a few seconds less, and you will have no image. And also is a technique that is not known in the history of art. More or less in the same years, in the 90s, John Nichols, you know who John Nichols is, had a different idea. If the image can be a chemical degradation of the cellulose of the fibers, well, he also used the bas-relief. This is a plastic or plaster bas-relief, not metal bas-relief. He covered it with a cloth and he rubbed powder ochre on it. Automatically, the higher part of the bas-relief under the cloth will get more pigment and the deeper part will get less pigment. So what you need is automatically a sort of negative on the left and the positive, well, the negative on the right. So you see this has pseudo-negativity properties as the Shroud of Turin, and also 3D properties, encoded 3D properties, because for the same reason, where the bas-relief is higher, you put more pigment on it, and where it is deeper, you put less. However, this technique produces an image that has a pigment. He used powdered ochre. So this is not the way the Shroud of Turin is. It has no pigment. The Shroud of Turin has discolored fibers. So Nichols thought that maybe, and this is the important point, when the artist in the 1300s made the shroud, he used natural ochre, which is a mineral, and it contains impurities, of course. So maybe these impurities contained in the ochre that the artist used, with time, during the centuries, have etched or discolored the fibers of the linen beneath them, beneath the image, and the pigment, since it was a loose powder, came off. So what we now see is a very fainter image, a faint image, which is a ghost image. The original image was stronger, more visible, because it was done by ochre that the artist has rubbed. what we see now is a ghost image. That's why it's so faint, so almost invisible. This is an experiment done by Joe Nickel. So this is the hypothesis. I won't repeat the whole thing. The only thing is that blood stains were added after the image had been done by rubbing the cloth. This mechanism would explain the fact that the image is on one side of the cloth and also the micro traces of ochre that has been found in the image area, because that's where the pigment had been applied. So what I did was simply to verify Nickel's hypothesis, who worked only on the face and only with powdered ochre, not with a life-size image, and without really experimenting this idea of the impurities contained in the mineral, in the ochre. So we prepared a cloth with exactly the same thickness and the same weave of the Turin shroud. And then we, from literature data, we know what more or less the color of the shroud of Turin is. These are reflectance spectroscopic data. So we aged our white linen cloth by heating it into an oven. Well, this is a spectrum of the Turin shroud. Baking our cloth in an oven, you get a yellowish color, and we found that at a certain temperature for a certain time, we get more or less the hue of the shroud of Turin. So it's 215 degrees for 3 hours. And then you wash the linen and you get the right color. Then we have experimented with dry pigment to see how a whole body image can be obtained by this rubbing technique. So what we did was to have a volunteer, more or less. You lay it on a very large table. This has not been done at the university because it would look very strange to have a PhD in his underwears laying on a lab bench top. So this was done in my secret laboratory, my bat cave, as I call it. So you cover this poor guy with linen cloth, and then you rub it with a dry ochre, and you learn a few tricks. For example, you see that only the most prominent parts of the real body can be rubbed, and the pigment cannot be put everywhere unless you want to obtain a very bad image. So the image must be completed freehand after you put it flat on a bench top. Blood and whip marks are then painted with a small brush, and, well, with tempera painting, basically. For the face, of course, I have used a berry leaf. This is a plaster berry leaf that I have made myself after many trials and errors. And so with this technique, you have a visible image, which is, however, shaded, but it's not distorted because you are putting the pigment where you want to put it, and you follow the formation of the image. So the formation is guided by the artist's hand. I'm not an artist, so maybe my image is not as beautiful as that of the Shroud of Turin, but this is the result. The image that I have obtained, and hope you can see it, the negative, is something that now looks a little bit like the negative of the Shroud of Turin. You see it's shaded, has blood and wick marks that are sharp, it's undistorted, and so on. And this is my result. Well, there are wrinkles, depend on the light. Well, maybe on the screen you can see it much better, but however, this is probably how the Shroud of Turin looked when it was manufactured in the 1300s. It's sharp, it's more visible. However, it is not obviously a painting. There are no brush marks. The image is shaded and it's a pseudo-negative, something rather strange. Maybe this is the clever way the artist had used. So now we have learned how to produce a life-size image by using only ochre. Of course, there is a pigment here. So we have to repeat this procedure, adding the impurities that we suppose were present in the ochre. So we will repeat this experiment with a pigment containing something that should mimic the impurities that were in the ochre that the artist used. We don't know what this sensitizer or catalyst or impurities should be. We are just trying to simulate the procedure that occurred during centuries. So I have tried with many salts, acids, and organic compounds, and so on, so on. What I found was that what works well is a very diluted water solution of sulfuric acid, 1.2%, more or less. And you mix it with a pigment. And I have decided to use a blue pigment. Why a blue pigment? If the micro traces of ochre that they had found were red ochre. Well, I have used the blue pigment because when the pigment will be washed off, you can be sure that what you see is the image generated by the etching of the impurities that I have added on the linen fibers and not the pigment itself. Okay, you can clearly see when the blue pigment has been washed, and what you see is the image generated by the discoloration of the fibers. So what I get experimenting on the face only was something like this. This is the original of the Turin shroud, and this is my reproduction of the face. And this is the negative of the Turin shroud and the negative of my reproduction. Now, when you add the pigment with these traces of acid, of course, you have a water solution of sulfuric acid, you mix it with the pigment, and you have like a slurry, not a loose powder. So it's much more difficult to get a shaded image by rubbing a slurry on the berry leaves. That's why my image is not as shaded, not as nice as the Turin shroud. It's a little bit sharper, but I'm working on that. The second step is that you have to artificially age this image with the pigment and the acid. And how do you age it? You cannot wait for centuries for the impurities to etch the fibers. You have to speed up things. So you heat the cloth in an oven for a few hours at a certain temperature. This is an artificial aging step. And then also you have to remove the pigment. I have used a washing machine just to simulate the centuries that have passed for the pigment to be lost. However, these are the results for the face. On the left is the Shroud of Turin computer workup, and this is my result. So we do have 3D informations. And what about the yellow fibers? Well, these are the original yellow fibers. You remember, small yellow spots on the topmost fibers of the thread. And also in my reproduction, I'm sorry, the screen is somewhat dark, but you have yellow spots on the top fibers. So, because of course the pigment stays on the surface of the cloth and the discoloration is on the top. The image is not fluorescence as in the Turin shroud, and then you repeat the whole thing with the whole body with this same procedure. Again, a poor guy under a cloth, you rub it with the blue pigment, and then you age the long shroud with this shroud machine that basically, well, it's an electric oven. There is a fan, and hot air will be circulated. There is a thermometer, and so on, but basically it's an oven. And then you wash it in the washing machine. What you get is this. This is the Shroud of Turin. This is my reproduction that is here. Sorry, you can't see unless some light is shed on it. However, as you can see, well, I have added, of course, the burn holes and so on, just bells and whistles to have a visual matching with the Turin shroud. Maybe if I put it here, it will be more visible. And this is the negative. You don't see it, but it's very much the same. And also, I have done a life-size reproduction, namely 4.5 meters long. Now, if the screen can be lifted, you can see the real thing, the whole shroud, front and back. Yeah, okay. It's very difficult to handle such a long cloth, but now that I have learned the technique, I can make a new shroud in about 1 week. So maybe I should put up an internet business selling shroud imitation of a fake. However, you see, it is a bit disappointing, you know, because the image is so faint. However, this is the front image, this is the face, the arms, the blood marks, and so on, the burn holes, and everything. I realize this is not a perfect copy, of course, for several reasons. Why? One is that I'm not an artist, so the shroud maybe is not as beautiful as the original one. And second, I have used a slurry containing acidic impurities, and the slurry gives an image that is not as faded and with half tones as the Turin shroud, but I'm working on that. And the third thing is that, of course, I have used an artificial aging technique. And no matter what technique you use, this cannot reproduce the natural aging of the shroud that took centuries to occur. So at the microscopic level, possibly the discoloration of the single fibers or other micro properties would be a little bit different. But this cannot be done. You cannot reproduce with absolute accuracy any object. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. What I'm very interested in is what is the reaction of the Catholic Church to your discoveries? And what is their stand today of the Catholic Church? And
Well,
have you been able to change their, the attitude of the Church?
Well, the Church has no position as to the authenticity of the shroud. The official position of the Church is, this is the shroud, it's an image that let us think about the suffering of Jesus. Let us, the scientists, decide if it is authentic or not. This is the official position. But then basically they support always and only believers in the authenticity of the shroud. So the Church officially had no reaction to this reproduction. The shroud expert or syndonologist or shroudis or shroud experts, that 99% are believer in the authenticity of the shroud, say that this is the best reproduction ever of the Shroud of Turin, but of course it's not as good as the original shroud. There are details that you have not been able to reproduce. And one thing that surprised me was that all the features and the characteristics and the properties that until 2 days ago were mysterious and unexplainable, namely, I mean, the negativity, the superficiality, and the 3D informations. When you reproduce them, okay, those are completely forgotten, and they came out with new properties. Yes, but you have not done this. Yes, but the thickness of the yellow layer of discoloration of the fiber in your shroud are 2 microns. In the Shroud of Turin is 2.5, maybe 3 microns. So you see, you have not done the right thing. And also the blood, you have put tempera blood, tempera painting on the shroud, whereas in the Shroud of Turin, they have found actually traces of blood. So how do you explain that Under the blood marks, there is no image, so they keep changing, the claims they do. But I'm working on the blood problem. Other question?
Just one question. First of all, thanks, Luigi, very much for your wonderful reproduction. I'm here at the back. Hi, I'm here.
No more questions?
Yeah. I would like to ask a question about the bas relief that you used.
Where are you?
Here.
Okay.
Okay. You used the bas relief just for the face.
Yes.
At the same time, you pointed out correctly that in the original, some of the body images are distorted, too long fingers, too long arms, and so on. So do you think the original, if it had used a real body, it would have probably been less distorted? So do you think that the original used a full body relief instead of just a face bas relief?
I'm not sure about that because, of course, the artist had this wonderful idea of rubbing a cloth over something, maybe a body, maybe a whole bas relief. I think he used the bas relief for the face because it's much easier, much cheaper using a bas relief only for the face. And if you look at the Shroud of Turin, I didn't point out this, but under the face there is a strange sign here. Looks like a collar, looks like something that shouldn't be there, something squared. And I think it's the neck of the bas relief that the artist used. Generally, when you carve or produce a bas relief, you put a neck under it, not just the chin like this. And that's the trace of the head with the neck of the bas relief. Look at the shroud and you will see very, very clearly this, the neck of the bas relief. And the other distortion, of course, can be explained because when you rub a body, the cloth can move a little bit. And also the hands, I had a few troubles rubbing the hand. One, especially the hand that is behind the other, the lower hand. You can't really rub it because the cloth is too stiff and doesn't come out well. So I did that hand freehand, not by the rubbing technique. And then it's very easy to do something, wrong when you're working freehand. There was one here and one here. You decide. You?
This isn't a chemical question, so you may not be an expert on it, but after the carbon dating was done, of course, as you would expect, there were people who argued that the carbon dating was wrong. The argument that I heard most is that it was based on impurities that were on the cloth since it was created. I wonder whether is that still controversial? Are there still debates about the carbon dating of that, and has it been redone?
Well, the carbon dating has been attacked. The carbon dating results has been attacked in several ways for years by saying that the technique was wrong, but it's not. By saying that there was a conspiracy between the Archbishop of Turin and the carbon scientist, and then they came out with the theory that the fire in 1532 had added carbon dioxide to the cloth and making it younger, but the guy who had suggested this theory was a fraud, was a Kuznetsov, a Russian. He made up completely data, names of scientific journals, name of museums, names of institutes, everything. Now, basically the answer is that, well, the carbon dating was accurate, but they had taken a sample at the upper corner here. And there was an invisible patch. And we don't know why, just in that point, they had put an invisible patch. When the shroud was damaged by the fire, the nuns had put patches on the holes, and they were just pieces of white cloth with large stitches like this. It was not an invisible patch. It was a very ugly patch. So why just in that small corner they should have put an invisible patch? But if it is invisible, of course, it is invisible. However, when the sample was taken for the C14 dating, I think something like 20 persons were present, among them textile experts and people who knew the shroud. I mean, literally thread by thread, so there was no invisible patch. And also, during the 2002 restoration, one of the most prominent experts of ancient textiles said that there is no invisible patch. And now they have cleaned all the burn holes, and they have many small samples, something like, I don't know how many burn holes they have cleaned. Now they have many samples taken from different places of the shroud, and each of them might be, again, carbon dated, so we have a representative sampling of the shroud. And I bet my money that the results, if they ever will run again, the C14 dating will be again medieval. We are out of time. One more?
Yeah. Hello.
One and two?
Can you have you
No,
looked into
the gentleman here is waiting.
Suppose for a moment that what the scriptures say is true. According to the scriptures, Jesus Christ resuscitated after 3 days. Do you think that the paint, the ochre paint, in 3 days, I mean, the time was enough for the paint to dry up completely? Because if it was not dried completely, while resuscitating, the shroud should have had blurring. I don't know if that is clear to me.
I'm not sure I got what you are meaning, but
The paint with which Jesus Christ was painted, before putting the shroud on, no? No.
whatever they did on Jesus Christ is not important, because we know that a real body will not leave that kind of print on cloth.
Okay.
This is my very first experiment. You remember? You get a very ugly image. So the shroud is not a contact image.
Yeah.
It cannot be.
Okay.
Actually, they call the image orthogonal projection, as if it was projected on the cloth orthogonally, like a photograph, not a contact image. Yeah? Have you looked into? I can't hear you. No, the name of the artist is unknown. We have no hints. We have no ideas. And however, I think that in a sense he was a genius, because he has this idea of this rubbing technique to give a very strange image, very different from the painted image that we were used to. At the same time, he did a few mistakes, of course. There are splashes of blood where shouldn't be, and so on, and a few distortion and something like that. But the technique is very simple. It only uses very simple technique available in the Middle Age, is almost trivial. What we see now is the result of centuries of aging and the pigment coming off and so on. That's why it looks so strange now. But originally it was like this, and the technique is very simple. For more questions, go to my website and send me an email and so on. Thank you.